Good evening and welcome. I'm Carrie Johnston, President of the Detroit Lakes Regional Chamber of Commerce. Welcome and thank you for coming. And welcome to those who are going to be joining us later on YouTube. We're going to be showing this. You'll probably be live and up later this evening. So if you wanted to see this again or share the information you see tonight, make sure to share that YouTube video and connection with them. I just want to start the evening with, first of all, saying thank you. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting such a great opportunity for all of us to hear what's going on around us and in St. Paul and the issues that are at hand. And I wanted to especially say thank you to Ecumen for hosting this in a great location and to be able to see their new facility and see what's happening here in the Lakes area for services that are provided. So thank you again to Ecumen and all of that leadership. I also want to thank the media. We appreciate you being here and covering and keeping people informed. With that, I want to welcome our moderator for this evening. Sharon Sinclair is going to be moderating and keeping us on time and keeping us going. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you, Carrie. Wonderful to see all of you here tonight. I think we're just going to have a very exciting evening. And thank you to the four gentlemen who are here to speak to us. We are so delighted to have Senator Rod Skoy of District 2, Senator Kent Eakin, District 4, Representative Paul Marquardt, District 4B, and Representative Steve Green of District 2B. I'd like to also introduce, we have KDLM here with Carol is in the back. Carol McCarthy is here. Kevin Mitchell is here. Video and recording all the whole evening live. And it will all be available for you to view on YouTube eventually, right, Kevin? Yes. Okay, and two very important people we must introduce. As you know, when we go through these events, all the speakers are timed, and we have two important people to introduce. We have Mary Hansen. Would you stand, Mary? Because they're going to need to know you. And Manoya Lund. And very good. Thank you, ladies. And they will be later on when we have our live forum. We have Lynn Durwood, who is at the back of the room, and Deanna Sinclair. And they will be moving among the audience with microphones for you to bring your questions forward. So just to briefly introduce League of Women Voters, the League is a nonpartisan national organization which focuses on informing voters of issues and introducing candidates, and on assisting persons eligible to vote to become registered. And if you're interested, have more interest in the League, there is some literature at the back of the room, and you could sign up for a contact from a League member if you are interested. Now, this evening's meeting will be different from previous League events that you may have attended in the past. At all the Meet the Candidates events, all questions must be submitted in writing, they're screened, and they must be addressed by all the candidates. Tonight, we are not hearing candidates, but legislators who have already been elected and are presently in St. Paul doing the people's work. And consequently, our format will be just a bit different. So each of these gentlemen will give us a 3-minute introduction, and League has prepared 3 questions that of general local interest that they will speak to, and for 3 minutes. And after we've covered the League questions, we will open the forum to the audience. So when you have a question to bring to the attention of the group of these gentlemen, please stand, and one of the microphone ladies will bring a microphone to you, and you can present your issue and ask your question. And you will also be timed, and you will have 1 minute to present your issue and ask the question. Now, if you've done this before, you know that you will get a notification from Mary. Now, when you start your speech, she will be timing you, and you will have to look for the 15-second card. And when you see that card, finish your sentence, and then you will see stop. And if heaven forfend, you shouldn't stop then, you will get the stop now card. Now, these gentlemen are all familiar with this, but they will have 3 minutes for all of their responses. Now, does that make sense, and you understand what's going to happen here when we open the forum? And if you have any questions, please let us know. But we would encourage you to be thinking about the questions that you would like to present. All right, and at the end of the forum, we will have 3 minutes for closing comments from the legislators. So, without further ado, I'd like to start the question time. And the first question that we will speak to, the Detroit Lakes area has job openings that cannot be filled because the communities have a shortage of affordable housing. The lack of housing affects employers' ability. Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped right into this. This is my last forum. I'm losing my job, I can tell you right now. Thank you, Senator Scott. And since in appreciation for your pointing that out, would you begin?
Not that I need to say any more than we're going to say during the question and answer periods, but I just briefly introduce myself. I'm Rod Squire, a farmer from Clearbrook. I have the great pleasure to represent large areas of this area in the Minnesota Senate. I also have the pleasure to serve as the Senate Tax Chair this last number of years and a couple of years forward. This year, it's the budget year. This is the year of the biennial where the legislature sets the budget. It's going to be better this year because of the work that was done the last couple of years. We have a surplus this year, which is meaning that for the first time in a number of years, there will be some resources available to invest in long-term care and education and workforce development, et cetera. But having said that, I think we also need to remember that we're in about the shape that we were during the start of the Governor Ventura years. Our unemployment rate is about the same. Our surplus is comparable. And from my perspective, we don't want to redo the mistakes that were made under those years, which really led us to doing activities that were not sustainable into the future, which led to 10, 12 years of deficits, which were hard on the state's budget and the state's people and the state's investments. And so the Senate is going to try to do a middle road approach. We are proposing to some spending on education, some spending on long-term care, some dollars that will be invested in workforce development. We are going to propose a modest amount of tax relief, trying to target some property tax relief and also some investment in perhaps a workforce housing credit. But we're also proposing to put a significant amount of money into the reserves in the Minnesota's Rainy Day Fund. We have been building that the last couple of years. 2 years ago, it was around 2% of Minnesota's budgets. It's now up to 3.5%. The bonding agencies would like it to be at 5 or 4.9%. So we think we should, during the years where we have resources, we should set some more aside for the years when we do not. And so we're going to have a modest down the middle approach to the resources that Minnesota has available this year. And I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Senator Skoye. Senator Kent Eakin.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here tonight. I'm Senator Kent Eakin. I represent District 4, which includes all of Clay County, all of Norman County, and 3.5 townships here in Becker County, including Detroit Lakes. And I think it's important to note what's happened prior to this last budget session. We are now in the black. That's a new experience for me because in my previous 10 years in the House, we had been experiencing deficit after deficit after deficit. And we made some decisions in the last 2 years that has finally put the state on sound financial ground so that we are now, as I said, operating in the black. We can now start making some long-term decisions for our long-term prosperity. I think one of the problems we've had in the past is that when you're dealing with deficits, you're always kind of in emergency mode, and that's not the best way to be making decisions as to just how to get out of the current financial crisis or budget deficit that we're facing. Now we can start looking more long-term, and that's important because there are a lot of long-term issues that we need to grapple with, including issues pertaining to transportation, issues pertaining to long-term care, education, workforce development. All of those issues are so vitally important. And I think it's important to note as well that we do have some bipartisan agreement on where some of the greatest needs are. In transportation, for instance, there is bipartisan agreement that we need to make significantly more investments in our roads and bridges and in our infrastructure. There's also a bipartisan agreement that we need to do more in the area of long-term care. These are two areas where we've fallen greatly behind. So there's going to be some differences as to how to find the funding necessary to deal with those funding crises, but it's good to note that there's an agreement on that at least, what the problem is in those areas. And some of the areas that I've focused on, I do serve on the Health and Human Services Finance Committee. Long-term care is one of the issues that I've focused a lot of my attention on there. Do also serve on the Higher Education Finance Committee, also on the Agriculture and Rural Economic Development Committee, on the Capital Investment Committee, and on the Elections Subcommittee. So serve on a number of different committees, and I think this is a very important time for us to be getting feedback from you because we are now in the process of putting together the budget bills. We just received our targets, which is the amount of money each committee, each finance committee gets to work with. And when we get back from break next week, we're going to be working in earnest to put those budget bills together. And it would be good to get your input, your thoughts on what needs to be done as we move forward with that, with this critical period of the legislative session for the next two-year budget cycle.
Thank you, Senator Kent Eakin. Representative Paul Marquardt.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Sharon. Thanks to the League of Women Voters for hosting this gathering tonight, and thank you all for coming out. I'm State Representative Paul Marquardt. This is my 8th term in the state legislature, and I've represented the Detroit Lakes area since 2002, and that has been a real honor. I'm currently married to my wife of 31 years, Colleen, and actually it's 33 years, so I just did the math. But I have 2 daughters who both teach, and one is married, and we have a granddaughter. So that will be almost 2 years of age, so that's been a lot of fun. This is a good time to be having a meeting like this because we are talking budget. And the main reason we do a budget is to make sure that we can keep our economy and our way of life going strong here in Minnesota. And Minnesota's always been a good, diverse economic state, despite the, being a cold weather state. We've been successful doing the things we do because of the investments that we have made in some very important areas. And when you look at the community of Detroit Lakes, it's no difference. I mean, a huge amount of the budget, 48% of the budget, goes to early education through college. And that is the key. And we have made those investments, and here in Detroit Lakes, you have both excellent school systems, excellent community college, and one of the things that we have to make sure we do, and I know there's efforts right here in Detroit Lakes where that's being done, is to make sure that what we're doing here, early education through high school, is meshing with the job needs for tomorrow. And we do that, and actually this is something you just think would naturally be happening, but we've really just started to do this the last 2 or 3 years where we're really aligning what's occurring in our high schools with what's occurring in getting our students career and college ready, working with our community techs and colleges and so forth. And that's going to be a real key. Just right here in Detroit Lakes, we know there are jobs out there that are available, but the companies can't find people to do those jobs. We need to make sure as a state that we're aligning that, and one of the best ways to do that is to bring high school and college and career together. So that's a major area that we're talking about. Long-term care. Not only are we providing valuable services to those with disability and our senior citizens, but it's also one of the big economic drivers in our area. And then when we talk about our cities and counties and battling AIS, all of these things dependent on what we do as far as the budget. So it's geared towards making sure our economy stays vital, and our quality of life stays high.
Thank you, Representative Marquardt. Representative Steve Green.
Thank you. I am Steve Green. This is my second term in the legislature. I don't know if you can hear me or not. My wife Cindy and I have been married for 36 years, and we have 10 kids, or excuse me, we have 6 kids and 10 grandkids. There's 16 of them all together, I know that anyway. And they are my favorite subject to talk about. And so I won't get off too much on that because we could be here all night. 3 minutes wouldn't be long enough. But it has been a very exciting time in the legislature for me. The first 2 years coming in the minority, I didn't have much of a say and didn't get too many bills. I didn't get any bills heard, actually. And that's kind of changed this year, so that's a new experience for me. A lot of the 3 questions that you have here are on the forefront in both the House and Senate, and I'm glad to see that. I think that it's long overdue. I'm also glad that we have a surplus, but I can't go on without reminding you that before the first 2 years when I was in there, when I think in 2010, I believe it was, we had a $6 billion deficit, or close to it. And it was through the actions of the legislature, the Republican legislature, and being responsible that changed that around and turned it into a surplus. We didn't get to see the whole surplus because what was left over had to go back and pay off most of the school shift that was there. But coming in this last 2 years, the state was in far better shape than it was 2 years before that. And there was a lot of taxes raised. And now I see part of the surplus is from the taxes, part of the surplus, a good share of the surplus is also because we saw a drop in gas prices, and that's according to Minnesota Management and Budget. And so it only goes to prove, in my opinion, that if you give the citizens of this state back the right to keep their money and spend it where they want, the economy will grow. Other than that, I don't have too much to say. I think we'll address it in the questions, but I want to thank you for having me. It's a great turnout here. It's good to see, especially when there's no election coming up, that people are still interested. That's what we need. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Green. And now we'll go to the questions that the League has put together, and we will start alternating the speakers. And with the first question, we will start with Senator Ecumen. The question relates to the Detroit Lakes area has job openings that cannot be filled because of the community has a shortage of affordable housing. The lack of housing affects employers' ability to recruit and retain the workforce needed for current and future economic growth. What can the state do to alleviate the shortage of affordable housing in outstate communities, and do you support these actions?
Well, thank you for that question, and that has been a huge issue for our area in particular, and we do need to pursue legislation that would address this factor in rural Minnesota. No doubt, as far as the ways to deal with it, there's obviously grants that can be provided for those who are providing the housing that's necessary for our workforce needs. Tax credits, that's another way that we could address that issue. I do support using whatever methods are necessary from the state perspective to address this problem in order to alleviate the workforce problems that we're facing as a result. I also think that we need to address issues pertaining to young people who are leaving the area because they're not finding the opportunities necessary. And we need to do that through, I think, internship programs and things of that nature that will help link the employers with these young people who are seeking employment and hopefully find jobs that keep them in this area. Our biggest export from our area has been young people, and we need to stop the out-migration that's been occurring among our young population. So for that reason, I think we need to look at the workforce development needs as well, the training programs that we need in this area, and we need to create a more seamless system between the higher ed and the training centers and the jobs that are out there to make sure that our young people do have the opportunities necessary to stay in their communities where they've grown up and to raise their families here as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Eakin. Representative Marquardt, what can the state do to alleviate the shortage of affordable housing in outstate communities?
Well, I think we're going to sound an awful lot alike, all four of us up here, but it is a huge obstacle to economic development in rural Minnesota. You look at some of these Roseau, Thief River Falls, where they've got industry there, but they literally can't get affordable housing. And, you know, part of the problem is no matter where you're at, whether or not you're in the metro or in the rural area, lumber costs the same, the workforce costs the same. And so you might have a home that you can't build for maybe under $100,000, and yet in that market, in that small rural community, you'd never be able to sell it for $100,000. And so we have to somehow be able to buy that down so that the contractors and that doing the work, it's not going to cost them $100,000 to do that. And it's not just workforce housing. There's a lot of our small communities that don't have adequate senior housing. I know that's a little bit different, but it's a huge issue for economic development in rural Minnesota, in that so many seniors want to remain in the communities that they've grown up in, but yet the old two-story house with the big long stairs down to the basement, they can't do that anymore, and they have to go into a one level where the maintenance is being done by somebody else and so forth. And we have a lot of our small communities that do not have that housing. And so it's not just workforce, but it's also senior housing that we have to provide the dollars for as far as the state.
Thank you, Representative Marquardt. Representative Steve Green, what can the state do to alleviate the shortage of affordable housing in outstate communities?
Well, have been working on this. I have ideas that I'm bringing forth myself, and other people have different ideas as well. Some of the areas that we're looking at are apartment complexes. That's been tried. The problem that we have is exactly what Representative Marquardt says. By the time you get the building built, it's not worth the loan value to have it. One of the areas I was looking at was partnering with the businesses that are looking for help and trying to get some starter homes up. And if we can have the businesses involved in purchasing parcels of property within the city limits or next to the city limits that can be annexed, we could use infrastructure grants to help the cities get the facilities out to those places. And then by partnering with the manufactured homes or modular homes, set up starter houses. And by doing it in this way, we can do away with the prevailing wage, which may make some of you mad, but that is one of our problems. When they built the apartment complex in Roseau, all the grant money that went in to help build that was eaten up by prevailing wage, and when they were done, the apartment still was more owed on it than what it was worth, and it really didn't work. And so by going with a private partnership, and we can put people to work building the modular homes in a controlled environment and then setting them out there. We wouldn't need to provide a home for everyone, and that's the key. And they wouldn't have to be big homes, they could be just a starter home. By doing that, we would open up apartment buildings for those who didn't want to stay in the homes, and we could also maybe reduce some of the cost of the existing larger homes for the people that would like to get into them. And so that's one idea that I have. The other is what we have been working on. When I went to school, and still in our area we have some, but there was a big, we used to call it Uptown Shop, but it was a vocational programs within the high schools where the kids could go if they weren't acclimated to the classroom as much. They would go and they would learn welding or auto mechanics or whatever else that the school could offer. It worked very well, but when funding was down, it was one of the first areas to be cut. The other thing is we have businesses right now that are working with our vocational schools. The model is there where the business will actually hire the people first. They will go through the process of, I don't want to say weeding them out, but giving them the trial period to see if they're acclimated for that work. And if they are, then we get those people into the vocational schools to learn that trade. And those things have been working really well, and I'd like to expand on those and move those forward.
Thank you, Representative Green. And Senator Skoye, what can the state do to alleviate the shortage of affordable housing in outstate communities?
Well, thank you. It is a real issue that we're struggling with across the state from Worthington to Roseau. both of the representative mentioned the Roseau project. That was a pilot project that we carried last year in the Senate tax bill and through the conference committee process, trying to figure out a way to, what we could learn about covering this gap. Because what happens is they build the building and the rent doesn't pay enough to cover the entire cost of the building, so there's this gap. And we started it with a grant program, and you know, it did build the project, but it wasn't as successful as we wanted. So what we're looking at this year is a couple of things. Currently, Minnesota has a provision that cities can use called tax increment financing. They use it for a number of redevelopment issues. If there's brown fields that are contaminated fields, they can use it for soil remediation. They can also use it for low-income housing. We're looking at expanding that to workforce housing. We think it would give an ability for the city to take the increment and the taxes that are going to be collected over the next 9 years and use that to cover about 12% of the gap that we're talking about and what the housing is worth versus what the rent will cover. So that covers some of the gap. Then the other thing that we think would be valuable, as opposed to a grant program, we're going to propose a tax credit program for businesses that are interested in building housing for their workers or for workers in their communities for other businesses. And we think it's important that it be done as an income or as a tax credit so that the businesses are making these decisions about the size, the type, and the availability of the unit. And we think that will also help cover the gap. Now, we don't think we need to have a huge program with this, because what we're seeing with the Roseau project is that as you build these around the state, the investors are going to realize that there is payback to this, and the amount of money that they're able to generate will be increased. And so we think that we're going to do a modest program. We don't want to do it so large that everybody thinks that the credit is going to be the way forward forever into the future. But we need to do enough of a program so we can get, you know, maybe 8, 10, 12 communities putting up 26, 28 unit market rate housing buildings, and then give us another couple years to see where that goes, because my expectation is that the financiers are going to realize that the gap is not as large as they originally thought, and they'll start to do this on their own. But we have some specific projects that are that are proposed to be in the Senate tax bill this year. We did the pilot project last year. We learned from that, and we think we can make some progress on this important issue.
Thank you, Senator Skoye. Moving on to the next question. Chronic underfunding and piecemeal approach to senior care has made it difficult to pay nurses and other caregivers competitive wages. We have a shortage of nurses and caregivers in this region. At the same time, we have an aging population and growing demand for long-term care for both home and community services and nursing home care. Providers are struggling to recruit and retain caregivers, forcing some to suspend admissions to their homes. This impacts access to care in the elderly's hometown, near their families and their friends. What specific workforce enhancements do you recommend to improve working conditions in this industry? And will you support these improvements in the current session? And we're starting with Representative Marquardt.
Well, the question, I think, listed all the real concerns that we have, and I just had a great conversation. Senator Ecumen and I had a great conversation this afternoon in Perham with long-term caregivers, and it was, you know, heard everything you just mentioned, and we know in rural Minnesota, you have a senior population that's probably around 20% of the population versus many of your suburban metro districts is about 7 or 8%. So it is certainly even a more poignant issue here in rural Minnesota when we deal with long-term care. And the number one thing we can do is raise the salaries for the caregivers. That's number one. And last year, 2 years ago in 2013, for the first time in about 5 years, we were able to raise funding for nursing homes by 5%, and then there'll be about another 3% this year. Now, that might sound good, but that is not keeping up with what's happened for many, many years. And I do think, Democrat, Republican alike, we're hearing a lot of support for 5%, another 5%, along with some restructuring of the whole works. And Senator Ecumen has been just a champion in that area. But for the long term, one of the things we have to watch out is how we deal with the budget this year. And one thing that really scares me is we can't go, when we have this surplus, to the give it all back mentality. We cannot go back to the Jesse Ventura years when we had the surplus and we thought we could give it all back. Because the problem is, it leaves us with no margin of error. And it's not a matter of if, it's when we get into another recession. And Senator Skoye has mentioned this too. So we need to make sure that we do things wisely this budget year so that we can continue with budget surpluses. And otherwise, if you go back and we run into a recession and you've got no margin for error, it's going to start what happened in the 2000s. We had a decade of budget deficits almost each and every year with a budget crisis. And what did that lead to? It led to us cutting areas or not funding areas like nursing homes, and cutting LGA, which led to property taxes doubling in a decade. We didn't fund education as we should have. Operating referendums and property taxes on schools doubled in 10 years. Tuition doubled in 10 years. I mean, this is what budget deficits lead us to. So I know we've got to watch, we can't just give it all back. We've got to use balance and prudence when we do this, and that's key to funding long-term care into the future.
Thank you, Representative Marquardt. Representative Green, you've got the question, right?
Okay, yes, I do. The nursing home funding, and I have to agree with these guys, and as much as I hate to, this is, you know, I'd like to say that this snuck up on us, but it really didn't. We saw this coming a long time ago, but when you're dealing with budget deficits, you know, things happen. But what it comes down to is what is our priorities? You know, where we have a certain amount of dollars, we need to spend them where we have to prioritize where it's going to give us the best bang for the buck. And I think that some of the approaches that we see coming from the House this year are going to deal with that. And it does come down to the increased funding for the workers. And if you haven't had an opportunity to go visit with the workers in the nursing homes and even the administration and find out the problems that they have, you should do that. They have a terrible time even getting people to come in. My wife is a CNA, and she cut back to part-time simply because of her age and how hard the work is. But she tried to go in on just for call-in. Well, she was getting called all the time because they're that short on workers. And so the funding has to increase. But what you have to understand is with the limited amount of dollars, then some other areas are going to have to be cut. But then we get into the priorities and where can we cut. And I think that there is places to cut others in other areas in the general fund, and we could maybe get into that if you guys have questions on that later. But you know, it's not just the nursing homes, it's also our hospitals. You know, they need constant upgrades too, because it's changing. One thing that I will say that I've been finding out in my time in St. Paul is that there's a lot of advancements made in the home health care. And the amount of money that it takes to keep someone in their home is far less than what it takes if they have to go into facility. And so I hope to see more work in that area and to expand that area, because not only are the seniors happier there, the cost is much less. And so there's a lot of work to do. I hope that we continue to move forward on it so that we can, even if we can't get ahead of it, we can at least try to stay even with it, because when you fall behind, it's very hard to catch up.
Thank you, Representative Green. Senator Skoye.
Thank you. Just briefly, a little bit of background. The state sets the reimbursement rates for nursing homes, and so they are obligated to live within that reimbursement rate. Back in 2008, we did a rebasing, which was an effort to try to readjust those reimbursement to actually be reflective of the costs. That was repealed in 2010 during the aforementioned budget resolution, which saved $300 million or $350 million. That was part of the budget resolution, but it also meant that those nursing homes didn't get their readjustment to their reimbursements that they so drastically needed. And I'm going to let Kent talk a little more about what's going on this year, because there's again this year an effort to try to adjust the reimbursements to be more reflective of the cost. And it takes money. There's no free lunch in this world. So let's take a little look at what we're doing with our budget targets. The Senate is spending somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.1 billion, of which we're proposing $341 million of new money to go into the Health and Human Services budget, which a large percentage of it is going to go toward this exact question to be resolved. And it takes resources, and we're proposing to put those resources into that. As opposed to the House targets, we have a surplus of about $1.8 billion. They're proposing $2.1 billion of tax cuts. So already they're spending more in tax cuts than we have in surplus. Then they're proposing to have some money for nursing homes. Their proposal is to cut $1.1 billion from the Health and Human Services budget. That's the budget that funds these long-term care facilities. There's no way you can get $1.1 billion out of that budget and still provide new money for long-term care. The math just doesn't add up. So we're going to have a little bit of a tough run as we get toward the end of session this year. I think the Senate has picked a pretty good middle road, and we're proposing some new money in our targets to go specifically to long-term care, because as we look at our state, particularly rural areas, we're aging. The demographics are against us. We have more demands for long-term care, not less. We have issues of workforce in these facilities. They're paid less than some of the servers at the fast food restaurants. You think we can cut the amount of money that's going into those budgets? I would think not. So we're going to try to increase it.
Thank you, Senator Sky. Senator Eakin.
Long-term care should not be competing with fast food providers for employees. Obviously, this is one of the most important jobs there is in our communities, is taking care of our most vulnerable citizens, our seniors and those with disabilities who need long-term care. And I think it's important to note that that staffing levels have been a real issue. And the amount of added burden that's already been referred to that's being placed on those who are there. I've heard from many providers who have said that's to them an even bigger issue than the pay they're receiving in some cases. They just want more help in providing that care. So that is a huge issue. And one provider was telling me today that they've been seeing in the eyes of people that have been working there, because of the added burdens, the job is becoming more difficult and less enjoyable because of that. And I know that the people that are doing this work are not doing it for the money. They're doing it because they are getting psychic income out of it. The fact that they're doing something that's helping somebody else, that's making a positive difference in the lives of others, that's the reason that it's being done. But even that psychic income seems to be going down now when you see the added burdens being placed on them. So, and getting the pay up is absolutely critical to making sure that we're attracting and keeping good quality people to provide good quality care, again, for our most vulnerable citizens. We talked about the restructuring bill to try to address the disparities between funding between the metro and the rural nursing homes and long-term care providers. Also, there's the 5% increase again this year. I see, and they all cost a significant amount of money, but even with the 5% increase and the restructuring bills, as I see it, they're really still Band-Aids. They're not really fixing the long-term problems. They're really stopgap measures more to help stop the hemorrhaging and the loss of stability in that industry. And we need to go much further. And I do have another proposal in for, it's a constitutional amendment to provide dedicated funding for long-term care. And I think it's justified for a number of reasons. One, we do have constitutionally dedicated funding for roads and bridges. We have constitutionally dedicated funding for parks and trails. We have constitutionally dedicated funding for the arts, for public broadcasting, for wildlife habitat. I think that seniors and those with disabilities who need long-term care should rank right up there with them. And I think that we need to also draw the public's attention to this and engage them in the debate, and that's what a constitutional amendment would do, because it'd be put on the ballot, and so people would be a part of that debate. And we need to shine the spotlight on the problem of long-term care. A lot of people want to bury their heads in the sand because it is a difficult issue to deal with, but we need to deal with it, and we need to engage the public. So those are my proposals.
Thank you, Senator Eakin. Now we move to the League's final question. Even in Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes, water is no longer unlimited. Groundwater levels are dropping and wells go dry. In addition, the quality of our water is in jeopardy. Recent bills in the Environmental Committee have the potential to put Minnesota's water quality at risk. And we're going to start with Representative Green on this question. What solutions do you support to maintain Minnesota's water quality and to ensure the solutions are straightforward and cost-effective?
Well, I sit on the Environmental Committee, and the bills that I've seen coming through don't necessarily jeopardize the water quality. The quantity will basically depend greatly on the rainfall. What I've found out from sitting on this committee is a lot of the areas where we're looking where the water quality needs to be monitored, it has been being monitored. I've looked at the studies. A lot of our farmers, for instance, who irrigate, have to send in a water quality paper to the MPCA once a month. And if there's anything that's out of the ordinary, then they can have their permits jeopardized. And so not only do the farmers monitor this, but the MPCA does their own monitoring. And so I think that that's the key. If you do away with monitoring, I can understand why there would be concern. I shouldn't put it that way, because I am concerned about the water. What I'm saying is right now we're doing what I think we should be doing. And so we will continue to monitor that. As far as the quantity goes, the water levels come up and down in our aquifers based almost solely on rain. If we don't get rain in certain areas, the aquifers will go down, and then when it rains, they'll come up. And I don't know how you can legislate rain. So the key is to monitor and make our decisions based on what the monitoring wells tell us.
Thank you, Representative Green. Senator Skoye.
Thank you. And first, let me say that I am a water appropriator in my other life. I'm a farmer. We appropriate water. We appropriate surface water from the DNR through the DNR appropriation process. We do not have wells. We appropriate surface water, but I am fairly familiar with what's going on with regard to the reporting. It's okay. It's probably not as comprehensive as it could be. Part of what's happening in Minnesota is you used to draw a line kind of diagonal across from the northwest corner of the state down toward St. Cloud and the cities, and everything north and east of there had excess rainfall, and the areas to the south and west, the farther south and west you get, were deficit in rainfall. That line is moving toward the northeast, so it's more critical that we are monitoring what our aquifer water levels are. We are in the process of working to make sure that those monitoring wells are in place. We did have some efforts to try to make sure that the appropriators were part of that, paying for those monitoring wells when they were in watershed districts that they were concerned with. Having said that, it's an ongoing process. We need to pay attention to what's going on. If truly the climate is changing, it is impacting our rainfall, and we need to make sure that we have the mechanisms in place to accommodate those changes as they go forward. With regard to water quality, You know, clearly, we're going to need to be involved in making sure that the water that flows north and south out of the state is clean. That's going to entail things, activities that people are going to do, that some of it's not going to be very comfortable to do, some of it's going to be controversial, but it is important that the water that leaves the state be clean. With regard to our lakes, there is a couple of bills. There's one bill that's going to be heard in the tax committee after break to repeal the EIS funding. I think that's going completely the wrong way. I mean, we made a major initiative last year to fight back locally against the aquatic invasive species in this state. And now there's an effort to repeal that. I would hope that you folks are active in your opposition to that, because here in the Lakes country, it's pretty important that we stop the spread of AISs, and if we can, find research to figure out ways to kill these pests. So there's a lot going on this year. I think we're trying to be good stewards of Minnesota's one of our most important resources, and clearly the land of 10,000 lakes water is an important resource for us.
Thank you, Senator Skoye. Senator Eakin.
And water is one of our most precious resources here. It's what we're known for as a state, as Senator Skoye already said. I agree on the issue of AIS, that we need to protect the funding that's there and move forward with further investments in that area. And not just dealing with the aquatic invasive species that are already here, but also trying to identify what's going to be the next one coming down the road that we have to protect our waters from. And it's much easier to prevent the AIS from getting in than it is to deal with it once it's here. So I think that we need to focus a lot more attention than we have, but it's always easier to deal with a problem that's already here because it's visible, as opposed to one that hasn't arrived yet. But I think we need to focus on that. Also, on the issue of water quality as well, I think that we do need to make sure that we're spending and investing dollars wisely in keeping our waters clean and cleaning up our waters. That means also doing it on a basin-wide basis. Doing a piecemeal process doesn't seem to work very well. I think about the Red River Basin, for instance. I do have a bill in that would actually give more authority to the Red River Basin Commission to deal with not just with water quantity issues, which is what they currently deal with, but also the water quality issues, so they could develop a standard on a basin-wide basis that would be applied to all those that are emitting pollutants into the water, not just on the Minnesota side, but the North Dakota side as well, South Dakota and Manitoba as well, trying to get everybody on board. That's the most effective way to deal with those problems. Sometimes I have concerns about, again, doing it on a piecemeal basis. And I also have concerns that we don't do things in a way that creates a major backlash out there against the environmental movement, against further efforts of the larger goal of a healthier, cleaner environment generally. And that means that we do, I think the agencies do have to take into consideration economic impacts and look at a comprehensive picture here of how things are being applied, and working with landowners, working with the communities in which these regulations are being applied, so that they're being applied in a way that makes sense, that doesn't create that backlash, and that does have the ultimate objective of a cleaner environment with cleaner water as the end goal. We all want that for our waters. Again, that's what Minnesota is known for. It's becoming a more precious commodity with each passing year, each passing decade, as there's less and less clean water that's available. And I think about how rich we are in comparison to some areas of the country like Arizona, where there's talk that someday there's going to be wars fought over water, clean water, like there are wars being fought over oil today. We don't realize how precious that is right now, but it's going to become more and more precious as time moves on.
Thank you, Senator Eakin. Representative Marquardt.
Well, first of all, the aquatic invasive species, and Senator Skoye really worked hard to get that funding to counties, because we know the Detroit Lakes area has been a leader in fighting AIS. In fact, a couple summits they've had here finally brought the state together in a state realization of the huge concerns. And I think that funding brings in about $350,000 to Becker County. And I think we've purchased a couple contamination units already. And I mean, these are dollars that are well worth for taxpayers' expense, because not only is it a quality of water issue, it is a quality of economic development in this area too. So I'm hoping, number one, and I know there's some bills to eliminate that funding. I don't quite understand why, but I will strongly oppose that. Another area, I guess without repeating what the other folks have said here, you know, one of the things I'm dealing with is oil train safety. And of course, pipelines, I think, are part of, you know, that issue. But I don't think just because it's a pipeline, it should just go willy-nilly wherever. And the Sandpiper is one example that I know is going through some very pristine areas that would have huge impacts on groundwater. And I think sometimes as legislators, we try to ignore the experts, these folks who are working with this each and every day and know the impacts and so forth, and we always put, well, economic development ahead of it or whatever that might be, and I don't think it has to come down to that. But while the Sandpiper pipeline would carry about 400,000 barrels a day from the Bakken when fully in force, I don't think it should be going across areas that can really have an impact on groundwater. And I'm hoping, and I know there's some that really want to speed that process up. I don't think resources that have taken millions of years to develop really give a darn if it's another year before we decide whether or not we should have something that might cause huge danger to our natural resources. And so I guess just wanted to throw that out there because I know some folks, you know, might just say, you know, pipelines are going to solve all the problems. They won't. Even with what's coming out of the Bakken, even with that pipeline and Keystone, you'd still have, with current levels, about 500,000 barrels a day coming through rail in North Dakota, even after you build all those. And that's assuming North Dakota doesn't increase its production. So I'm sorry, where am I at? Am I done?
Thank you, Representative Marquardt.
So thank you.
We will now move into the open forum section of our evening. How many of you have questions that you want to bring? Okay, a good number of you. I think perhaps the most efficient way would be for our microphone ladies to step up here and for us to get in line. If you step up by the microphone ladies and in line so that we can start the open forum. And you will be asked to give your name, and if you're representing an organization, please introduce that as well. Remember, you're going to have to keep looking at the lady over here to see about your time. You do not need to feel that you must speak for a minute to ask your question. You can do it in 20 seconds if that works for you. And gentlemen, you do not need to respond for 3 minutes, but you could, just so you answer the question. Also under this forum, you may direct your question to an individual. You do not need to address the question to all the gentlemen here. But if you pick one person to ask the question, the rest of you will have a chance to respond if you wish. And your time is 3 minutes per question. Does that all work and make sense? Okay, then let's begin. This is the longer line. Let's start on this side.
Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Sarah Pender, and I am a school counselor with the Detroit Lakes Public Schools. My question centers around education, and I'm asking for your support for extra support personnel in our schools, from counselors to psychologists to school nurses, anything that can help our students. The growing number of mental health needs and that our students are facing is increasing every year. Here in Detroit Lakes, we just learned that 50% of our student population is on free and reduced lunches. And so there's a lot of needs of our students. Right now, many of us are feeling a little taxed and a little stressed with the amount of state testing that's being required in our state. We are not able to fully engage with our students as we would like to help some of them in engaging their post-secondary opportunities for internships and matching with different post-secondary education opportunities. So I just ask your support, and if you have any suggestions about that. I know the governor has talked about reducing some of the state testing. Thank you.
Senator Skoye, can we start with you?
Sure. Well, there is a proposal to reduce testing I've been advocating for a number of years to replace the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment with the Northwest Education Assessment, which schools give anyway. Not making any headway, but reducing the testing that they're giving with regard to the MCHA is a good start. With regard to funding, the Senate targets for E12 is around $350 million. The House target is a little over half of that. The governor's proposal is considerably more than either one of those. My guess is that we're going to be somewhere in the middle. It takes about $170 million to put 1% onto the formula. I think most people are advocating for something in that realm with regard to the formula increases. There is initiatives to help rural schools with their facility maintenance, and I expect that will receive some resources. My expectation is that the pre-K initiative will get phased in over time or reduced somewhat, and I don't want to speculate where the committee's going to go too far, but the resources just are not there this year to implement that 100%. There's space issues with regard to schools to think about, so my guess is that'll be phased in over some period of time if it moves forward. So we've got the formula, facilities, pre-K, and then there's the issue of how we are going to compensate the teaching staff. There is a proposal to make changes. They call it last in, first out, LIFO or something along that line to make changes in that area. What I'd like you to know is that almost half of Minnesota's teaching staff in the state is currently reimbursed on something other than a steps and lane package. It's based on some sort of a quality component that's been developed locally. It was done under the initiative that Governor Plenty brought forward called QComp. What we need to do, in my opinion, is put some resources into QComp so that all the school districts in the state can develop this compensation variation that would be based on the quality of the activity in the classroom versus just a steps and lanes compensation. The key component here is that it's done through a negotiation between the local school boards and the local staff. There's all kinds of variations on this depending upon the school district you're in. It seems like a pretty good mechanism. It's working pretty well for half of it. So the Senate's proposing pretty significant resources going into E12. Today I can't say exactly how it's going to be split up, but we recognize the importance of educating Minnesota's children.
Thank you, Senator Skoye. Senator Eakin.
And yeah, education, it's the biggest part of our budget. K-12 is about 40% of our state's general fund budget, and there's a reason for that. It's because it's the best place we could invest our money is in the education of our young people. And it's a real economic engine for our state. And as far as the issue of school support staff, the issue is coming up about school counselors. And we, unfortunately, we rank pretty high in educational standards except one area. That is in the area of school counselors. I believe we're 49th now. We're second to last as far as the number of students per counselor. And so we need, that is one area where we definitely need to invest more in education and support staff generally. And it was brought up about the mental health issues, which is becoming more and more of an issue. We've seen some terrible incidents of violence that have occurred at schools as a result of not taking care of mental health issues early on. School counselors are critical for that, and also critical for creating a more seamless transition from the K-12 school system to higher education. And we need to do more in that regard as well to make sure that students aren't spinning their wheels, going in directions that are dead ends. The counselors can help get them on the right path from the very beginning. I also agree on the issue of school testing. I think we have been going overboard in that issue, that we definitely need to reduce the amount of testing. Testing's important, don't get me wrong. It's a necessary tool, but it's a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. And that's the problem with, I think, what's happening with testing now. It's becoming the end. And when you do so much of it, it becomes so onerous. that you're teaching to the test, and I think sometimes squeezing the life out of the real education that's supposed to be taking place, which in my view is really getting students turned on to learning and whetting their appetites and developing an intellectual curiosity in these students so they have a desire to learn after they leave the classroom. That's kind of hard to measure on a pen and paper test. So the pen and paper test is good at finding out how much they're able to memorize, how much basic information that they have, but education goes much further beyond that. And I saw pins that some teachers were wearing coming down to St. Paul recently that said testing is not teaching. And that is correct. We need to put testing in its place, which is a tool. It's a means to an end. It's not the end in itself.
Thank you, Senator Eek and Representative Marquardt.
Sharon, if I might suggest, and there's several people here waiting for questions, and I will start the key here. If we could go to 1-minute responses, maybe on all the folks, if that would be all right. And I'll start that, because I'd love to talk a long time
Nobody
about
would
that.
complain.
Okay, very good. Well, first of all, I think the best way we can fund schools is on the per pupil funding. Give them the dollars to allow them to use them as the best they think they can. Because right now, we have a world's best workforce, which means there are several goals that school districts have to meet. It's a new system. So you're putting dollars into a more accountable system. And when you talk about support staff, one of the things they have to do is make sure students are career and college ready. That's going to drive who their staff shall be. And then the final thing I'm going to say on this is there are some really wonderful things that I see Superintendent Froke here on getting high school students ready for college and career right here in high school. Getting them, so at BTD needs welders or we need nurses or whatever, you're starting in 10th, 11th, 12th grades to do that. And I know Detroit Lakes is looking at that. They've been to the state to look at what can make that happen. But what an excellent way to try to really put what we're doing in our high schools with the workforce. So, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Marquardt, and good idea on the 1 minute, but Representative Green, in fairness, if you
I
need
think
three.
I can do it in a minute.
Well, okay.
Okay. To the issue of testing, there has to be some testing, and I'm not going to come here and tell you what we're doing is working perfectly, but there has to be something that shows us how the kids are doing. There's also, the teacher reciprocity. If we have a shortage of teachers in certain areas, we're having trouble getting them licensed, especially in the ag areas, and if we could somehow get reciprocity with other states, that we could use other states' teachers in Minnesota. The other issue was that we touched on before is also in the vocational areas in the school. If there is a shortage of teachers to teach a vocation, is there a way that we could do what we did when I was a kid, and that is to use local experts that might be able to come in and teach a welding class or teach a mechanics class. And we are looking at those areas as well.
Thank you, Representative Green. Lynn, your question.
My name is Todd Knupp. I work for Becker County DAC and a group home at night. I like, you guys are talking about long-term care, but Minnesota's got a lot of handicapped volume people. There's a lot of handicaps in Minnesota. And Mr. Green's the only one that mentioned anything about home health care or, like group homes or anything like that. I agree with the nursing home things. My thing is why the DACs, I know that Mr. Erkin or Kent came with to view our DAC, but why can't the young Mahoobie people, the high school people, the elementary DACs, Emmanuel, all be on one thing instead of sending all different lobbyists to fight for the extra monies? When you give it to nursing home, why can't you give it to every one of us? 2013, they got it, the nursing homes. 2014, we got it.
Okay, Senator Eakin, would you start? with
Sure,
this?
and thank you for that question. And I agree with you that we need to be working together. And I think oftentimes we've seen groups pitted against each other, equally, worthy causes being pitted against each other. And I think we need to form a coalition of all long-term care providers, no matter whether you're talking about group homes or nursing homes or in-home services. And as far as The 5%, the home and community-based services, I'm carrying the bill for the 5% increase for that. We had the 5% coalition last year. We were successful, and one of the reasons we were successful is because all of the long-term care providers got behind it. That's one of the things, one of the reasons that I was proposing the constitutional amendment as well, is because it is something that I think all long-term care providers can get behind, because it's not just for one kind of long-term care, it's for the whole continuum, all the way from in-home services to group homes to assisted living to nursing homes and to whatever homes we haven't even thought of yet. Because there are going to be new models, and we're going to have to be looking at that for efficiencies as we move on too, as well as providing more funding.
I agree with what Senator Egan just said. And when I'm talking about 5%, I guess I put nursing homes and home and community-based health together. I mean, I think they should be together and not separate. So I'm hoping we can do that this year. There had been, for several years, cuts to home and community-based, and then last year we were able to, over the last 2 years, do 6% increase and eliminate the cuts that had been forecasted. So I think when we do 5 and 5, it's nursing homes and community and healthcare based.
Representative Green?
Thank you. I do also like the idea of joining together. I'm going to split off just a little bit because these guys are answering the questions, but I'm going to give you a heads up, and maybe you already know this. There's something on a federal level called the Homestead Act. And if we can't, as a state, join together, Republicans and Democrats, and try to go to our congressional leaders and deal with that, we could see a lot of our group homes and DAC shutting down. I think you guys are familiar with that, are you not? Yeah, and just a short explanation of what that is. It's basically, it's more complicated. Basically, it's going to require that all the residents of the group homes end up going out and working one-on-one in a job instead of the structured society that they have now that most of them very, very much like. And to do that, you're going to have to hire someone to watch them, and it's not feasible at all.
Thank you. Senator Skoye.
I'm going to support Senator Egan and his efforts. He told a story on the floor of the Senate last year that touched a lot of our hearts, to the point that the tax committee that I chair raises the money that is going to get sent over to his committee for a target to fund these very important things. So we're going to put our money where our mouth is, Kent.
Thank you. Deanna?
I'm Trowbridge. I live in Detroit Lakes, work for the city of Moorhead. I guess I have two things. I'll make the first one short. Is last year you guys tried to stop the implementation of that fire sprinkler thing in the building code. It was billed as something that was only for 4,500 square foot homes. Then lo and behold, it gets in and it applies to all twin homes. You talk about wanting affordable housing, get that out of there. Override the governor's veto. That's a terrible thing. Moorhead has a whole slew of them going in this year, but only because I think if they got the permit in by right now, they can build it without it. We won't have a single twin home next year. I guess the other thing on the surplus, I would just say spend it on capital costs. Do not spend it on annual budget stuff, because when the money goes away later, now you're in even deeper hole. And as far as preschool, trying to spend it on that, I don't like the idea of that. My preschool right now, I get 6 hours a week. It costs me $90 a month. I saw in the paper okay.
What? I don't know. Representative Markwart, do you start?
Yeah. Well, Tom, you're exactly right. On the sprinkler system, we have worked really hard, and that's really hitting the border communities, especially Moorhead area and so forth. And as you said, the governor has been very adamant about it. He was actually willing to veto, wasn't it, the bonding bill, if that stayed in. So, and we've talked to him personally, and he is siding with the fire departments on this one. So the second thing, what you say there, I would, and I know Senator Skoye has mentioned about getting to that 5% on the budget reserve, which would be about $2 billion or 5%. That'd be about $500 or $600 million. I'd like to see us do that like this year. Give us and if you can do things, you got bonding bills and you got the transportation bill, which can deal with a lot of the capital stuff. But I still think we need, like the nursing home situation and the community and healthcare and education. And I guess.
Representative Green?
What was the question again? No, no, the
Which
sprinkler
one?
systems, I hope that everybody at the table agrees, and he's right. We tried very hard, and I mean, I would have let the bonding bill go down for that, but apparently nobody else wanted to do that. But no, I think it's very important, and I wonder sometimes if everybody understands just the implications of that. But yeah, I think the sprinkler system should be overturned, that part of that. I'm one of those rare guys, I guess, that thinks that a lot of preschool should be spent with the family. If the family has preschool-age children and they want to put them in a daycare, then they have the option to go look for that daycare. I'm not a big fan of putting that in the school system.
Senator Skoye?
I also support eliminating that sprinkler provision. I just want to tell you that overriding governors are hard. It doesn't happen very often. I think it's under 20 times in the history of our state. It doesn't happen a lot. But we're going to try to move forward on that again. With regard to your comment about sending the money on capital costs, it's absolutely right. A lot of this money is one time. It should be spent on one-time things or put in the reserve in order to not build up ongoing costs that were available when you only had one-time resources. So you're dead on that issue. With regard to preschool, one of the things that I want people to think about with regard to Minnesota, and I'm going to apologize at this point for going a little long, and I want to say this because I used to be a House member, and there's 134 of them, and you got to say a lot in a short period of time. But us senators now, we're a smaller body, so we can be more deliberative and talk slower. But let me just briefly say with regard to pre-K, part of Minnesota's economy is the fact that we have a large number of two-income families. Both spouses are working. Those children are in a facility somewhere. As long as they're going to be in a facility, we should be making sure that it's high quality and that there's some education components to it. That's the point. And if we're going to close the achievement gap that we have in this state, particularly down in this metropolitan area, you need to get those kids into an education facility to close that gap.
Senator Eakin.
We're all on the same page here as far as the fire sprinkler codes are concerned. I actually have legislation in dealing with building codes generally, and it does affect the fire sprinkler code as well. It's dealing with the border cities and allowing them to have building codes that are similar to the ones just across the river. For Moorhead and Dilworth, for instance, just across the river in Fargo, many of their codes are not as onerous as the ones in Minnesota, to give an opportunity on some of those codes to be in, I guess, uniformity with those in Fargo. So when you look at communities like that right on the border in particular, I know there's a lot of talk about building codes having uniformity across the state, but you need uniformity across communities. And Fargo and Moorhead and Dilworth are really like one community. So I agree on that. As far as the budget issue is concerned, I also agree that we need to be careful how we utilize that surplus so we don't go back into deficit mode. We've already just come out of that, so we don't want to go back into that again. And on preschool, one last thing, I guess, there's a lot of talk about preschool, and I guess I'm taking the senatorial privilege here again, I guess. But just one last thing, as far as the current, I guess, push to go from kindergarten, kind of pushing back. Somebody told me that maybe we should be starting at the beginning and starting from prenatal and moving up. And I thought that was a good point to make. And this was somebody that was actually lobbying on the fetal alcohol syndrome and was saying, if you don't catch it before it happens, you're going to be pouring money into that child for the rest of their lives. And think of the lost potential of that child. And I thought that was just a good point to bring up.
Mary, we're going to have you leaping up and down. Yes, I know. You brought up three good issues were brought up in one question, and there were wonderful issues, but let's just keep each question on one issue when we go, and I know Leah will do that.
My name's Leah Pigatti. I'm the executive director for Mahabiatwa Community Action. And I have several issues I'd love to talk about, but I'm going to focus on one. The universal pre-K. Our Head Start program certainly serves 4-year-olds, most of them funded by the federal government. but the state of Minnesota has been very generous to our Head Start program, and you have a proposal in for additional funding, and we're very grateful for that. Thank you. But I'm very proud to work in this community because school programs, child care programs, Head Start programs all offer high-quality educational services. With the funds you put into Parent Aware, you've allowed many child care programs to receive high-quality training and then awarding scholarships to those providers. Maybe there would be a way to look at community collaborative efforts in the pre-K bill.
Thank you. Representative Green, would you start us?
Well, I think that the proposals that have been brought forward in the pre-K initiative would actually harm the Head Start program. In that I think Head Start does a pretty good job now in how they go into homes and deal with the lower income kids or any kids really that may need a little help. But if you put them all into one lump program, I think you're going to find that even more so now that there's certain kids that are ready and certain kids that are not. And I think there's a real possibility of doing damage to the kids that are not in a universal system. And that's why I think it's very important that the families are involved and responsible for getting their kids where they want them.
Senator Skoye.
Well, I think there's some misunderstanding about the proposal for pre-K that's being discussed in St. Paul. The program is being discussed will be flexible so that the school districts can contract out with regard to the providers that are in the community. And what the result would be is that there would be more resources going into the 4-year-olds, which would free up the scholarships that would be able to go to the 0 to 3-year-olds. So what the goal is to not reduce the amount of resources going into Head Start. In fact, the Senate bill proposal increases it by $18 million, but to find ways to bring these 4-year-old programs into a higher quality educational setting. There are a number of problems with the scholarship program, particularly in rural areas with this Pathway 1 and Pathway 2, in that it isn't really working very well if you don't have the facilities that are offering that quality program. And if all your facilities are already at capacity, they're not going to start competing for those scholarship dollars. So there's things that need to be worked on here, but don't think that this is going to be one big lump program at your school, because it's not. They don't have the facilities to start with.
Senator Eakin.
Well, and I think it is important to note that, yeah, we can form partnerships here. And again, it's important not to be pitting, different parts of the early childhood community against each other. We're all in the same business together in education and in early childhood programs. So, and then another thing I was just going to mention, as far as universal programs, I've always been more supportive of the universal programs rather than targeted. I mean, targeted is good if you have the funding necessary to make sure they're adequately being funded. But oftentimes if you have, there's a saying that programs for poor people tend to be poor programs because they don't have a large base of support to maintain the funding necessary to keep them going, strong. Universal programs do. And with that, I'll yield the remainder of my time to Representative Marquardt here. So.
Well, and I do think with any proposal, just like Senator Skoye mentioned, Head Start would be a big part of that, because the schools, they don't have the facilities to do this right now, and they would contract out and so forth. We do know, though, if you're going to spend $1 in education, it's early childhood education. And the folks at the Reserve Bank in Minneapolis, Art Rolnick and Rob Grunwald, have actually looked at the data. And they said if we could close the achievement gap, primarily with white students, with students of poverty and color, that within 15 years, looking at their data, you could improve your GDP economic output by 2% in Minnesota. Now, you might not think that's huge, but 2% in today's dollars is $5 billion of increased economic activity. And to put that into perspective, that's like building 5 Viking stadiums every year. That would be the increase in the productivity if we could close that achievement gap, and you do it early on, not later on. So those early years are just vital.
Thank you, Representative Marquardt.
Might help fund our next Senate bill, Lakes, my question, Senator, is regarding the first two questions that you all were asked. The first had to do with workforce, and most of the responses centered around housing. But it seems to me that if we phased out or prorated the reduction in assistance or welfare benefits, it might incentivize people to join the workforce, because from what I understand, maybe even an increase in minimum wage might kick somebody off of their assistance, and so it's decentivizing them. So it seems to me we could create wealth for corporations, and it would be a benefit to the people providing that assistance if we could phase that out. The other thing regarding nursing homes, from what I understand, a private pay person can't purchase anything more than somebody on Medicaid, and so I think if the nursing homes were more consumer driven, it might create a little more revenue in the private sector rather than public assistance. Thank you.
Senator Skoye, let's start with you.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to start with the capital restoration. For the first time in 108 years, the Minnesota Senate is not going to be housed in the Capitol. We are moving out as of June 1st. The reason we're moving out is because the restoration project of the Minnesota Capitol, which is now 108 years old and hasn't had a restoration project since in that time period, is going to have significantly more room for public spaces. It's going to have handicapped accessible bathrooms, and it's going to have rooms in the building for when the Minnesota public comes to their capital. Because of those space requirements, and because the governor needed more room for his offices and the House needed more room for their staff, the Senate was moved out of the Capitol. Now, I don't know where anybody thought we were going to go, but it wasn't going to work to go to the Macy's store downtown St. Paul. They found the most economical solution was to build a modest building across the street, and that's where the Minnesota Senate is going to be housed. And in the scheme of things, most of the people there are going to be staff that are answering your phone calls. It isn't us. But anyway, with regard to the questions, of course we want to do workforce development that brings jobs to the community. And I forgot the last question, and I'm out of time.
Thank you. Senator Eakin.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I just thought I'd mention too, believe me, the senators don't want to leave the Capitol. That's the place everybody wants to be, and our offices right now are right next to the chambers, and that's the place to be. We're moving out for the general public, and I think that's the right thing to do, because the Capitol was never meant to be an office building for us. It was meant to be the people's building. But anyway, on the issue of the, I thought as far as the issue of welfare assistance, and I think one thing that I believe in is something known as the earned income tax credit, which actually helps people of low income that are working by helping them set aside some funding for the future. It's I think a way to make work pay, and that's what I think is critically important to incentivizing people to work. Also, on the issue of private pay residents and nursing homes, the reason that we want to keep the pay the same or the rates the same for private pay and for the MA patients is so that we don't end up creating a different level of care for those who are on MA from those that are private pay, and so I think that that's a good reason for that. But I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah, and I'll talk about kind of the welfare piece, the Minnesota Family Investment Program. I think maybe you're talking about. And I know I was on the conference committee back in 2002, 2003, where we did a lot of kind of reform at the time. And if you're on there, you're supposed to be looking for work or be working or going to school or caring for a loved one like 30 hours a week. Now, is there people that probably are violating? Yes, but I mean, it's not a majority. And one thing, the MFIB, I think, has been locked in at $500 a month since 1986. And the governor did put that into his proposal to raise that $100 a month. So, no one's getting rich off that. And I do think that when a state can say to folks, we're going to try to provide at least a minimum substantive type of living, that's worthy. And we could look at any program in the state, and find those who are abusing a program, whether or not it's a good one or a bad one. But I don't think we stigmatize people because they're on the Minnesota Family Investment Program. I think sometimes that happens.
Representative Green.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that gets tongue-tied, but there's 23 offices in the Capitol. The new office building is 90, and I think there's other ways we could have did it. That never even heard about that funding till I was sitting on the floor of the House and it got dropped in our laps. It was put in a conference committee, never went through committees, and that was not right. Welfare to Work, I do have a proposal. I couldn't get it in this year, but it would basically take people who are on public assistance, a certain age group, if they were not disabled, and it would cut their benefits by X amount of dollars, and then it would allow them to work in a job before anything else was cut, that amount of dollars. And you know, we have a lot of help wanted signs out there, and yes, they're low-paying jobs, but this could fill those. It wouldn't, you know, if you stayed within that age group of able-bodied people, I think that would work. And the private pay issue, I'm done. We can talk offline.
Thank you. Representative Green, please, people, one issue per question.
Hi, I'm Mary Rotter, and I own and operate and teach at Laker Prep Preschool here in Detroit Lakes. I'm also a Minnesota licensed teacher. I taught kindergarten for 10 years in St. Paul prior to moving back to Detroit Lakes. So anyways, Laker Prep Preschool is a pre-K center, specifically for pre-K students, and we are a 4-star rated program, and we utilize the scholarships, and thank you for supporting those. I think that the scholarships are fantastic, and they probably should be given a little bit more time to see if they're really doing their job, because it's still new to our state. And although Becker County was one of the first counties to roll out the scholarships, I think we need to give it more time, because I have people calling daily asking me if if I have scholarships available. Anyways, I guess what I would say is if you're wanting to keep pre-K fair, is what I would hope you would do, is to maybe expand the scholarships to other families, or maybe even give money to those people that want to become star rated so that they can themselves become more quality for our community.
Senator Eakin, would you begin?
Yeah, and again, we talked a little bit earlier about this, but I think, you know, there need to be partnerships developed here. I don't, and I think that's important to note also that, you know, the implementation of a pre-K program, a universal 4-year-old program, obviously there's going to be facility needs out there, and we're going to have to make sure that the capacity is there, and it's not right now. And so as I see it, there would have to be these partnerships, I think, with already existing facilities, already existing programs, especially the 4-star programs that have demonstrated that they're doing the job of not just, you know, providing care for the child, but actually providing a stimulating educational environment for them as well. So again, I don't see this as pitting, you know, different groups of early childhood programs against each other. This is something that should be seen as complementary, any proposal to expand any early childhood programs, and to be working with the other programs, not against them.
The Early Learning Scholarships is an excellent program, and if you're 185% of the poverty level or below, you can qualify for that. And we upped it quite significantly from about $6 million to $50 million. But even at that, we're still only getting to 9% of the kids, which is why ultimately we need to move to a universal system. But, and Senator Skoye mentioned this earlier, I think the model, and as I've talked to the administration, I think what's going to be occurring into the near future, it's going to be universal for 4-year-olds with the early learning scholarships 0 to 3. I think that's the model they're probably ultimately moving to. But thank you for your work, and what's nice is you have to be 3 or 4-star parent-aware system to get the funding. And so,
Representative Green.
I don't have too much to say. I like what you said, and I think we should give it more time to work.
Senator Skoye.
Well, nobody's proposing to eliminate the scholarships, but the interesting part of this discussion is that we have educators competing against each other. They're all trying to do the right thing, so we have to find a way to thread this needle where we aren't harming the good work that you're doing, but we're reaching out and reaching these children that aren't getting served. And that's the needle that we're trying to thread. And hopefully, as we work with our school districts, they will be able to provide that flexibility where they will work with you to provide services, and we will figure out ways to get at the children that need to be served. And let me just say one thing. It drives me nuts about misstatements and misrepresentations that come to public. I heard again that this building was slipped in the middle of the night. I was the chief author of the Senate tax bill. It was in the Senate tax bill when it left committee. It sat on the floor of the Senate for a month before it was heard on the Senate floor. Now, if the House didn't pay any attention to that, I can't help that. But it was not slipped in the middle of the night, and it was not done without public debate. It was done in the Senate Tax Committee, which I chaired.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Amy Munluck. I work for the Toxic Taters Coalition, and want to bring to you that we know that pesticides are potentially a problem for both human and ecological health. We also learn oftentimes that people have a hard time working with the Department of Agriculture and reporting their concerns around pesticides. We also see that this problem has the potential of growing a great deal with RDO's potential expansion in the Pineland Sands aquifer. And we're really wondering how we as an organization and how people can work with you in continuing to address this problem as it continues to grow in our communities, and how we can stop this problem from continuing to grow.
Senator Eakin,
I was the last one.
you were the last one?
Yeah.
Then we go to Representative Marquardt.
Yeah, you know, we talked about that in egg policy this year a little bit, and there is situations where someone who is putting pesticide has oversprayed or whatever that might be. We also have some problems with folks who won't, if you get into this register and you get into this website, then it's easier for even the Department of Agriculture to track certain things, and people don't want to register to get on there, which makes, when something's oversprayed, you know, what was used and so forth. So it is kind of, I think, you know, this was involving some bee pollinators that had received some overspraying, and they didn't want to be on this registration, which means they could have been notified when something was happening. And so what I'm saying is we need to work together on this. It certainly is a concern, but I think everyone needs to work together. No one intentionally is trying to do, you know, trying to spray onto someone else's crops and so forth.
Representative Green?
In the area of RDO, you know, just, I don't know if I have enough time to do it all, but for the record, the land that RDO is purchased was clear cut by Potlatch, and they're selling it for a lot of different reasons, most with regulations and property taxes. They're not going to increase their production. This is things I found out when I started looking into this. They're going to rotate their crop on a 4-year or 5-year, but I think this is to 4-year instead of 3, which is going to be better for the soil and better for the runoff. And they do monitor. That's another thing I looked into. They have monitoring wells everywhere. They know what the nitrate levels are, and there again, they send in their reports to the MPCA once a month. So if there gets to be a problem, it could be addressed immediately, but right now it appears as though they are within the limits.
Senator Skoye?
Well, I mean, there's trade-offs with everything. I mean, I know people are concerned about the use of pesticides on egg fields, but remember, you do one pass with a pesticide or you do multiple cultivations, and cultivation releases carbon into the air. So there's trade-offs to this. With regard to the overspray issue, that's not allowed according to the label on the materials that farmers use. The material has to hit the target or it's not allowed. Now, as we have moved toward more and more GPS applicators, the record keeping of where the target is and where the pesticide is applied is getting very good and very precise. And so we are making progress as an industry and able to understand where it's going and what it's being used for, and the record keeping is getting very good with regard to applications, because if you are an ag pilot and you're at your GPS on, you know exactly where you were when that machine was turned on and off.
Senator Eakin?
I was just going to mention as well that I think, you know, things have been moving in the right direction in terms of making sure that it's being applied obviously more effectively, more efficiently, in a way that utilizes less pesticide and less insecticides, because they are applying it more effectively than they had before. We do, however, want to make sure that these that the chemicals that are being used are safe, and that we're doing the research necessary to ensure that they're safe for human use.
Okay. Next question.
Yes, I'm Jerry Nelson. I'm a retired family therapist. I worked with over 300 families in the Becker area here. My comment is similar to another person, but I want to challenge you on some things. You are lawmakers, but I would really like to see you have more expertise from the fields that you're doing law with. In other words, the mental health profession giving you inputs on how to do things. I had family after family that wanted to work and could not work because of the way the structures of the welfare stuff was set up. And rather than think, okay, we're going to have one size fit all, we're going to have a bill that takes care of that, why not have like the facilities have, where they have individual programming for every person in that facility? Well, if you have a person on welfare, why not have a system of individualizing how they get and what they get out of the welfare?
Representative Green, will you start?
It sounds good, and I would like to jump right on it, but I would have to wonder, first of all, how would you implement it? It seems like it would be very hard to implement that on.
In the facilities, the individual programs are implemented by psychologists that know how to set up the programs to incentivize them. This would be a similar process.
Well, I'm always looking to streamline, so maybe we can talk.
Senator Skoye.
Thank you, and thank you. And you know, as a legislator for myself, what I've always done is tried to talk to the people that are actually doing the day-to-day work. I mean, if you want to know what's going on in a school, why don't you go visit with the staff? There's some research being done now where they're trying to reach some of these children that are having mental issues. They're talking to the janitors because they know the kids the best. So as a legislator, I've always tried to do that, and I think I've always had a pretty open door to try to reach people to want to reach me with their ideas. Let me just say briefly with regard to expertise on the committees, and we are a part-time legislator. I mean, I'm a farmer. I am never going to be an expert in healthcare. I don't serve on the committee. But I have expertise in the tax arena. I served as a school board member. I was a county commissioner. You know, part of my livelihood is the property taxes that we pay as farmers. I've served on the tax committee for a number of years, and hopefully that experience comes to bear as I'm a legislator. And I know we don't know everything, but that's why we reach out to you folks that are working the field.
Senator Eakin.
Oh, thank you, and I agree with that. That's one of the reasons that we come out here and meet with constituents, is so that we can get the feedback necessary to make informed decisions when we go down to St. Paul. And as far as the mental health issue, you know, again, we rely on your expertise. So please feel free anytime that you have ideas, and I think you bring up some very good points, legitimate points, that I'd be glad to visit with you more about.
Representative Markowitz.
Well, that is what I heard from you is a new concept that I have not heard before. I think we all realize the key mental health is when you look at crime and problems in our school, that's probably the leading cause. So I'm always interested in hearing new concepts.
Okay.
My name is Willis Matson. Some of you know me as a career regulator in the environment. I'm pleased to realize, Representative Marquardt, that you're aware of the pipeline issue. What you may not know is that the pipeline company has the upper hand when it comes to figuring out where it's going to put a pipeline. And it has rigged the process to put communities against communities. It's now getting Park Rapids pitted against the Detroit Lakes area for the two routes. It's a choice between a very bad route and a terrible route. Minnesota can do better than that. Minnesota is reducing its reliance on petroleum, in fact has 19% in the last 10 years. So the oil that's coming from North Dakota is passing through Minnesota by pipeline and rail and headed for the Gulf Coast, the East Coast for export. So we're a doormat state, yet we're not really regulating where the pipeline and oil is going to go. The reason for that is the regulations were taken apart by the industry some years ago, and they are given a great excuse to get past good environmental review and permitting. So we want to work with you to intervene in these pipelines and find a better route for them. Thank you.
Senator Skoye?
Well, the PUC has a process for locating the pipelines. It appears to be working. The advocates were down advocating for a different route. I understand there are other alternatives in play now beyond that. As with so many things, I think it's nice to have legislators have activity in it, but if the 201 legislators are going to start determining the routes of the pipelines, I think it's going to be a mess. And hopefully the professionals at the PUC do a good job, and I know you're not agreeing with that, but that's the process that we have set up in this state now. You know, oil is controversial because it pollutes the air. Oil has got controversial for other reasons, but it's also part of our economy, and you have to figure out what we're going to do. And yes, conservation is good. You know, everybody tries to conserve, but you know, we need to figure out how to move the stuff from where it is to the refineries. We have a refinery on the southwest corner of the cities, or southeast corner of the cities, that provides gas for the metropolitan area, and you know, they're going to get their fuel somewhere. And from my perspective, it seems like it's safer in a pipe than it is in a rail car. And so I hope they're able to figure this out, and I hope they're able to transport the oil where it needs to be safely. And you know, Clearbrook is the terminus for a lot of pipelines. I have some familiarity with what's going on there, and of course there are accidents, and of course there are spills, but I think less risk with that than there is with rail. And so hopefully we're able to figure this out as a state and as a country and move ourselves forward. But we're going to have, it's not going to be without some controversy.
Senator Eakin?
Yeah, and I understand that there's concerns with pipelines as well. But obviously, you know, again, what Senator Skoye is saying, we do need to transport this oil somehow. And I understand too that the pipeline isn't the answer to the problems that we're experiencing on the railroads, because the railroad traffic is going to continue to increase even if we do put in all the pipelines that we can put in. It does help to alleviate some of the congestion and some of the issues there and some of the safety issues. And I understand, again, that there's safety issues with the pipeline as well. And I think, I'm not sure if I think I was visiting with you and we're talking about the possibility of leakage underground. It's not as visible. That's one of the dangers that pipelines can pose. So we have to be very careful to make sure that we're constructing these pipelines well and that we're putting them in the right areas and not putting them in areas where they're going to have significant damage to the water, the underwater or underground water supplies in our state.
Representative Marcotte?
Well, I have serious concerns with the trains coming through our community, so certainly the pipelines are a viable alternative as far as I'm concerned. But most people say the PUC has the upper hand when it comes to this situation, or a lot of folks have done. So I'd be interested to, you know, hear from both perspectives on that one. And I mean, I am concerned. Well, I think we ultimately need pipelines. I mean, I think that is part of the answer to shipping the oil from the Bakken out east and south and so forth. But I do want to make sure that it's protecting the water. I mean, I just don't think they should just go anywhere. And I'm hoping, you know, it's good to hear advocates protecting where that's going to go.
Representative Green?
Thank you. And once again, you know, whenever these subjects come up, I don't support or not support them just on my feelings. I try to look into them. And one of the things with the Sandpiper as it goes through is the new pipeline is going to be much safer than the existing pipeline, which needs to be upgraded. And so that's going to help. When the Sandpiper goes through, it'll help with that. The other issue was already stated. Even though it may not decrease the amount of rails that we have, or trains on the rails we have right now, it will significantly help with the expansion of the rails, at least for a time. And so the pipeline is very much needed.
Thank you,
Could
Rick.
I add one thing? This didn't come up, and I should bring this up so people are aware of it. In the governor's budget, he's got $32 million as a rail assessment to be used for grade separation, which is for communities that have, like Detroit Lakes, where the train's going. So you can have roads like Roosevelt Road go under the road, and they're gonna try to do that in Moorhead. There's also a pretty significant component in the tax bill dealing with railroads where he's going to do a reassessment of value. It will add value back into the tax base of the local communities as they're trying to deal with rail issues locally. So there's a couple of funding proposals for railroads.
The one problem with the property tax part of it, as I understand it, 'cause looked into that too, it's not legal. It's been challenged in court and been fired down a couple of times, so it might be a non-starter on the railroad for that. But that said, I will tell you that there's 4 major railways in Minnesota, and when talking to them, their plan is that in this year, 2015, they plan to put $500 million into rail safety. And so, you know, they're already working on that, and the key for us is to make sure that goes in and does get done.
I gotta chime in here. I'm the author of that bill on the railroads and the property taxes, and yeah, they say they're going to sue, and hopefully we don't be afraid of that. Because the fact of the matter is, we're not treating railroads with the new proposal any different than we treat airlines, pipelines, public utilities. 80% of the states around the union are doing the same thing we're looking at doing, which is taxing their rolling stock, which is the locomotive, and their freight cars, which is part of their operations. And, you know, right now, the margin of error for those cities that they come through, and it's about 700 miles of track, is very small. It takes just one derailment, one explosion, you have a catastrophe in these communities. And these communities did not ask these railroads to come in and start bringing in 30,000-gallon tankers through their communities. The railroads are greatly profiting from this. They have created the danger, and they have a responsibility to pay for the safety. 65 of the 340 fire departments that go through where those trains are going through, and it's about 326,000 population, are half mile on either side of the railroad. Only 65 of the 340 fire departments have had the training for oil, trains, or pipeline safety. The bill that I'm authoring would help fund that to make sure they're trained. So, you know, if they want to sue, and that's the first thing they say, so be it. I don't think that speaks very well for how good a corporate citizens they are. They're creating a danger. They are profiting hugely from this. They should pay some of the costs. And I hope my colleagues do support that.
I mean,
Well,
because
can we just get under control again?
I'm not here
please?
advocating to take the responsibility away from railroads. I think the responsibility lies with railroads. What I'm telling you is you're proposing a plan that's going to put you in court and not give you any money to fix these plans now. Furthermore, I think your bill deals with railroad crossings, and the railroad crossings are not the source of the derailment. They're maybe a source of safety for our roads, and we can deal with that, but it's not going to help with the safety of the track itself on a derailment because you're dealing with crossings.
Can we move on? We have 6 people who have questions to ask, and we're going to ask that you just, rather than a comment, quickly ask your question, and we need to be done by 9 o'clock.
I'm Bob Merritt, and I'm wearing a hat as a father and a hat as an old guy. When I went to college, I was able to afford college on my own summer work, and I didn't have to take too many loans out. Today, we are straddling our children and saddling our children with humongous debts. We look out here, how do we expect teachers to pay those bills back? How do we expect to have an educated population? How do we stop the progression of the haves and the have-nots? That's what we're doing now. The ones that can afford to pay for their kids' education, those kids are going. The others aren't.
Senator Eakin, will you start, please?
Sure, and I can relate to that quite well. My daughter's in her senior year in college right now, going into teaching high school, and we'll have significant debts as a result, and we do need to do so much more in terms of keeping tuition levels down. They have been going through the roof, and the reason why is because of cutbacks from the state. When you cut funding from the state, and I think it's important to note that about 4.5% of the state's budget actually goes to funding state agencies and the state government itself. The other 95.5% is just pass-through dollars that go to our colleges, our nursing homes, our K-12 schools, and so on. And when you cut the state, what you're really doing is you're cutting funding to those institutions, and they have to make up for those cuts somehow. So the cuts are to lead to tuition increases and to property tax increases. And the tuition increases we need to get a handle on, as well as the property tax increases. They're both extremely regressive, unfair taxes.
Representative Markwart.
Yeah, the key to our economic development of the state is to make sure our higher education facilities are affordable and accessible. And as you just mentioned, that's not occurring. In fact, Minnesota right now ranks 5th in the nation with an average student debt of $31,000. I mean, that just isn't right. So we did try to at least kind of put a fix on 2 years ago. Governor Dayton and the legislature put a 2-year freeze on the both university systems. I'd like to see that occur again, a freeze for at least another 2 years. I mean, that's what we have to do to make sure we keep this affordable and accessible.
I think we're trying, oh, is it me or?
Yes.
Okay. I think we are trying to deal with some of that, those issues when we talk about moving more toward 2-year schools than 4-year schools and trying to get the kids that are geared more toward the vocational institutions into them. And I think that will help alleviate a lot. It's not a simple, it's not even as simple as freezing tuition or shifting it to the state. And this is why this is such a huge problem, because when the state goes into debt or takes the money, they're taking it from the taxpayers, so they're taking it from the people who are working. So the kids coming out of school may not have a debt at the bank, but they have a debt to pay with the state. And so, you know, it's more than just a real simple answer. And so I'm glad we're looking at it, but you know, just a freeze isn't looking far enough down the road as to what the problem is, why the education is as high as it is.
Senator Skoye.
I want to quote former Senator Keith Langseth, right here in Detroit Lakes, probably 6 years ago now, or maybe 8. And the question, there was a panel like this, and the guy next to him was expounding about how he was going to cut taxes for seniors. And Senator Langseth said, "I'm insulted to think that I shouldn't be contributing to my grandchildren's education, and I don't support that proposal." And we're going to again see proposals this year to cut taxes for seniors. But you know, Senator Langseth was right. Everybody gets to contribute a little bit to our kids' growth.
Okay, we'll start over here.
Les Ristinen, Wolf Lake Township, and I have an issue that's a bipartisan issue, absolutely. It's the Minnesota property tax administration ranks 38th in the United States, and it ranks 36th with the Wallet Hub Foundation. Now, we're way down there in the bottom. And for 24 years, I've been harping on this issue after we retired in Wolf Lake Township and got burnt, but good, by assessing that was absolutely illegal, and the people got away with it. But can you imagine, we ranked 38th, and our legislatures let that go on and on. I'm sure you people don't realize that many of you are paying as much as 40% of your income for property tax, whilst others are only paying 2% and 5%, and even some are even less. Do you realize that in St. Louis County, the assessors actually undervalued $16 million in property tax? We need some reform.
Start with Mr. Markwart.
When I was the property tax chair, in fact, Les, when you had come down, we put some things in place, if you remember. And one of those things was if you had like 5 or more people that thought the assessment process wasn't going so well, you could file with the Department of Revenue. And in just the last couple years, Well, and he's right. I mean, the property tax is the one tax where the government sets the amount upon which you're gonna pay on. So the assessor is crucial, that you have a person who's doing the job right. But we just in the last couple of years have increased the credential and the schooling and everything else that they have to do. So in the last 5 or 6 years, there's actually been a lot of work done to improve assessment practices throughout the state.
Representative Green.
Well, Les, I don't know if there was a question in there, or if that was just getting something off your chest, but I think I've got a couple of bills that you're aware of, but instead of talking about that, I'll talk about my favorite issue as to where's the land. You know, when Minnesota is the third largest property owner in the country, and the only one who owns more than Minnesota are the government, the United States government or the state of Alaska. So, you know, and now we've got the legacy funds, which, you know, maybe we could have a bill together to do a constitutional amendment to change legacy over to nursing homes. I was gonna go for transportation, but maybe we can work on nursing homes. But there's $100 million a year, just a portion of that goes just for buying land and taking it out of private ownership and sticking it into the state hands. And then the other aspects of the legacy also take land out of private ownership. And so, you know, if you're going to take away 25% of your base, you don't have to wonder why your property taxes are raising and why land values are going up.
Senator Skoye.
Les is right. There is much variation between assessing practices across the state. Hence, we, and as Representative Marquardt indicated, the last number of years have required more accreditation and more professional development be done in that profession in order to try to get more consistency. Now, we made those changes, and there are a number of counties that are trying to repeal, trying to grandfather, trying to delay the changes that we made because of inconvenience, I imagine. So we're trying not to undo what we thought was a good step forward to have more consistency in the valuation. It's important that no matter where you live in the state, if you have the comparable property, it should be assessed comparably.
Senator Eakin.
Well, I agree with the issue of consistency, and that's one of the problems with the property tax generally is that, you know, it is based on assessments, and assessments vary depending on who's doing it and how it's being done, and it varies greatly from community to community. And I've already mentioned just generally, I think we need to address the property taxes generally, getting property taxes down, because it is such a regressive tax, because it does hit lower and middle income people much harder, and because it does hit rural Minnesota much harder than other areas of the state. That means not, again, pushing everything off onto the local units of government to fund through property taxes, whether it be the school districts, the counties, the cities, the townships. We need to be anteing up at the state level to make sure we're providing good quality services across the state at an affordable price.
Thank you, Senator Eakin. Ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time. This has been a lot of fun and wonderful information coming from these gentlemen. I want to give each of them 1 minute to leave us with their closing little wrap-up thought for the evening, and we'll start with Representative Green.
I think we've said most of the stuff that you guys wanted to say. The only other thing that I would just thank you for coming. Thank you for the League of Women Voters putting this on. It's great. Like I said, I'm really encouraged to have a debate outside of an election year. But other than that, if my door is always open, you could look up my email. I'd be happy to talk to each and every one of you on any issues that you have. Thank you.
I think as you experienced tonight, you see that we do have pretty vigorous debate and dialogue between legislators. And it's good. I mean, that's really a very positive part of the process. You know, you don't have to agree on everything, but you do have to agree in the end. We're in the middle, about halfway through our budget year this year. I see a path for us to get done and finish up this in May with a good result for Minnesotans. So pay attention and stay in touch with us, because we like to hear what's on your minds, and emails is a great way to communicate. So thank you for your participation tonight.
And I would like to thank you as well for your being here tonight, asking the questions, being civically engaged. I think sometimes the biggest deficit we face isn't so much a financial deficit, but a deficit in public participation. and civic participation. And you set a good model for others. We need more of that. I do want it to be clear that you're welcome to contact us at any time. We certainly are open for input because, as I'd said earlier, we're not experts on all the issues. It's a dangerous thing to assume that we are. So I encourage that. And we're doing a lot of town hall meetings. This was actually the 6th one for us today. We've done Hawley, and we were in Perham, and we were in Barnesville, and Dilworth, and Glendon, and now Detroit Lakes. Tomorrow we're doing 6 more as well, and we're still doing another one on Thursday night. So Representative Marquardt and I have been traveling the district, and we welcome input from our constituents. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for your generous use of your time this evening. This has been very informational. Did I forget you again?
That's fine, Sharon. That's all right. Sharon, I sincerely
Please
thank you
don't.
to the League of Women Voters for holding this tonight, and just thank you all for coming out. And I think what you hear here is that none of these issues are black and white. You know, we deal with a lot of issues. There's not just 2 sides, there's 3 sides, there's 4 sides, and you talk about child care funding or education or whatever that might be. And so with that, contact us, please. I mean, we're, I think, all on our emails, and we'll get back to you, and just, we need your help as we go through this, because we are representing you. That government is yours, and so forums like this is fantastic, but just never hesitate to provide us with your input, because it's very valuable. But everyone have a very nice Easter coming up, and thank you so much for being here.
I apologize to those of you who did not get a chance to ask your questions. I'd like to make one announcement, if I may. The League of Women Voters will be performing a program Sunday, April 19th at 1 o'clock at Ecumen on trafficked people. Kevin Wellavand of WDAY will be showing a video film that he's made, and it would be sponsored by the Congregational Methodist Episcopal Church's Lakes Crisis Center League of Women Voters.